I wish I hadn't learned this. Public executions in history. Have you ever stopped for a moment and really questioned what normal means? Because some of the things that feel unimaginable, even horrifying to us today, were once considered ordinary parts of everyday life. Not hidden, not secret, but public, shared, even celebrated. And the most disturbing part isn't just what happened in history. It's how comfortably people lived inside it. Picture a city square in the past. There's noise everywhere. Merchants shouting prices. Children running through the streets. People arguing, laughing, living their normal lives. And then something shifts. A crowd begins to form. No panic, no confusion. People already know what's coming. They gather slowly, deliberately, almost like attending an event they didn't want to miss. Because today, there will be a public execution. And this wasn't rare. In many places, it was a social event. Families attended together. Food vendors sold snacks. Children were sometimes brought along, not because people were uniquely cruel, but because this was what the world looked like to them. In ancient Rome, this idea reached enormous scale. The massive Colosseum wasn't just an architectural wonder, it was a stage. A place where tens of thousands of spectators gathered to watch gladiator battles, public punishments and executions. To modernize, it feels like horror, but to them, it was entertainment, politics, and social order combined into one experience. And the crowd wasn't passive. They reacted, they shouted, they signaled approval or disapproval. The fate of a person could, in some cases, feel like it was being judged collectively in real time. Centuries later, the pattern didn't disappear. It simply changed form. In medieval Europe, public executions became a central part of urban life. They were held in town squares, carefully scheduled and publicly announced. Authorities believed this created order through fear. The message was simple: break the law, and everyone will see what happens to you. In England, many of these executions were tied to locations near the Tower of London, a place deeply connected with political power, imprisonment, and punishment. What's striking is not just the executions themselves, but how structured and routine they became. They were not chaotic events. They were organized, official, and publicly accepted. But the most intense transformation came during moments of political collapse and rebirth. During the French Revolution, executions became something even more unsettling: mass political theater. The guillotine was introduced as a tool of equality, designed to be fast, consistent, and humane compared to older methods. That was the intention. But intention and reality rarely align perfectly. Public squares filled again and again. Crowds gathered regularly. Executions became repetitive, almost rhythmic events of the revolution, and with repetition came something dangerous: familiarity. Here's where things become psychologically uncomfortable. Historians note a pattern that appears again and again. The more frequently people are exposed to violence, the less emotionally intense their reaction becomes. At first there is shock, then curiosity, then acceptance, and eventually routine. The mind adapts not because it is evil, but because it is efficient. It learns to normalize what it cannot change. In some cities across Europe, executions were even scheduled alongside festivals and markets. People could spend the morning buying food, attending social gatherings, and then walk to the square to witness a death sentence being carried out. To us, that combination feels impossible to understand. But within that world, there was no contradiction. Life and death existed side by side in the same public space. And here is the most unsettling realization. Most of the people watching did not see themselves as cruel. They were parents, workers, neighbors, people with ordinary lives. They loved their families. They built homes. They went to church. They laughed with friends. And yet within their cultural environment, witnessing death was not seen as abnormal. It was part of the structure of society itself. Over time, this began to change. Public executions slowly disappeared from Europe and other parts of the world. But not because humanity suddenly became more moral, and not because violence itself disappeared. The change came from shifting ideas about human dignity, about rights, about the belief that punishment should not be turned into spectacle. Societies began to reconsider not only what punishment meant, but who it was for. And then something even more important happened. The audience changed. As literacy grew and newspapers spread, people began to experience violence differently. Instead of gathering in crowds, they read about events in silence. Distance changed perception. Because when you are part of a crowd, emotions are shared, amplified, normalized. But when you are alone with information, reflection begins. Questions appear that didn't exist in the noise of the crowd. Was this necessary? Was this justice? Or was it entertainment disguised as order? Here's the psychological truth that makes this history so uncomfortable. Humans are not primarily shocked by violence itself. They are shocked by unexpected violence. When violence becomes predictable, structured, and socially accepted, the brain begins to reduce its emotional response. This process is called desensitization, and it doesn't require centuries. It can happen within a single generation.
That is what makes the history of public executions so disturbing. It isn't just about how people behaved in the past. It's about how quickly human perception adjusts to its environment. What begins as shocking can become normal. What begins as unacceptable can become routine. And that leads to the final question, the one that stays with you long after the story ends. If entire societies in the past could normalize something as extreme as public executions, what do we consider normal today that future generations might find completely incomprehensible? Because history doesn't just show us what people did. It shows us what people can become accustomed to. And the most unsettling part is this: cruelty doesn't always announce itself as cruelty. Sometimes it just becomes normal.